Good day, and welcome to the first Rand Swiss weekly wrap of 2024. As usual, I'm Bev Govender, and what we'll do is we'll go through some stories that affect you and your investments going forward. We'll start off a little different this year because it's a new year and we have been away for a little while. And what I'll do is I'll cover some major themes I think are going to happen in 2024. Both in, like I said, the normal space, and as usual, we have an AI segment / tech segment at the end that I think might, be interesting as well. So let's start off with what we think are going to be the themes of 2024. The first thing we cannot ignore is the elections. The elections here internationally as well. Roughly just under 50% of the world's population are going to be, in countries that are having elections in the next year. Obviously in South Africa, we know that's probably going to happen in the first half of the year. But we also have, the US end of the year. We have India as well this year. The UK, various countries, Pakistan, etc., etc. And like I said, 49% of the world's population. If you think of the fact that, places like, Saudi Arabia, especially China, over 1.5 billion people don't obviously vote. It's the vast majority of those that live in democracies are voting this year for, new governments. And so what can we think about that? Historically, elections have been in one direction. We've seen, once a country becomes a democracy and stabilizes a little bit, it becomes reasonably stable. South America, Europe, generally the trend has been over the last, say 70 years away from, dictatorships towards more democracy, towards more stability, etc. Unfortunately, the last couple election cycles, especially the last election cycle, has been a little different. I would note that, there was the January 6th in the US, which, irrespective of how you think about how serious it was more serious than anything else that ever been in the past, living memory in the US. So it was something that had never been happening in the years before. But they not the only place. I mean, we look at Brazil, there's been issues in Brazil. We looked at, places like, for instance, even, in Europe as well. We are seeing issues coming about, for instance, in Germany, there is moves to ban what's probably the third or second, depending how you measure these things, most popular party in the country, the Alternative for Deutschland, AfD. It's a huge, shift up in the normal operations of, what's normally a very boring, political system. And what's causing this, and what's the one of the reasons that we think this is happening? Well, some mention the fact that, Donald Trump caused it, but Donald Trump is not a factor that would affect places as far apart as Brazil and Germany. What the real reason behind this, I think, is a couple of things. Firstly, of course, it was kind of triggered by COVID and some of the craziness that happened around that. People just started thinking in different ways. And the second thing, and more importantly, I think it's debt burdens. Debt burdens have risen dramatically, and countries that have higher levels of debt become more unstable. And when you have more instability, then you have to have things that are going to curb that. Either you try to ignore the debt and carry on, or you try to think about it, which is usually very painful. They tend to not be good or not be pleasant for populations. And democracies and populations find things to be unpleasant. They tend not to, be as peaceful as they were historically. And I think that's one of the issues we are seeing happening right now. We are seeing, higher debt levels, high interest rates as well that go along with the higher, debt levels as well. The inflation issues we've had, though, they've come down dramatically over the last little while, combined to make things a bit more difficult now for the general populations in many parts of the world than they were, say, a decade ago. And what that means is that these people are looking for an excuse as to why this is happening. And, when you are in a democracy, you're trying to find alternative, players out there that you want to be pushing through. So, for instance, you're talking about Germany. The FDP has come back and, it's been quite a big power. And to give you an idea, even though it's a big party, it's like a quarter of the electorate would vote for the FDP. The FD, sorry, because they basically are pretty much banned, kind of like practice from forming a coalition with anybody, because nobody wants to be associated with them because they're considered to be almost untouchable. If you look at, for instance, in the US, we have Biden likely to be the Democratic nominee, though there is a possibility that he gets swapped out, later on. But right now it looks like the Democratic nominee. Trump seems to be, in for the Republican nominee. He doesn't even attend the debates. The field against him is whittling down now to Haley and DeSantis and Ramaswamy. Ramaswamy is not even being invited to the debates anymore. So the debates are just now between DeSantis and Haley. Chris Christie just dropped out a couple of days ago, if you look at it when you watch this. And so we get to a point where, whatever opposition's against Trump is going to get down to one person very soon. And it's going to remain to be seen whether or not that one person has the ability to basically beat him in the election or not for the Republican primary. Right now, it does not seem that to be the case. So he's probably going to win the Republican primary. So you're going to have Trump versus Biden. And in the scenario like this year, what happens? You have the possibility of a third party arising, which has happened. Robert F. Kennedy, the nephew of JFK, the guy who was shot on the Cadillac in Dallas, the president, the son of RFK, his brother, who was also assassinated. Quite unusual. You talk about two. One was a president and one was a presidential candidate, both assassinated, both in the same family. He's the son of one and the nephew of the other. He's polling at about 20% of the population. This is a significant polling in number for a third-party candidate. People like Ralph Nader in the past have gotten a couple of percentage points, not more than 10. The last time we had somebody as big as this was a guy called Ross Perot back in the 1990s, and he was the reason that basically Bill Clinton won his first term over George W. Bush, George H.W. Bush. Okay. The father of George W. Bush. Politics is so incestuous. But anyway, that is the situation in the US. In South Africa, what we're looking at is probably for the first time, the ANC has a serious chance of not making 50%. This is going to be a dramatic shake-up in terms of the politics of South Africa if it does not happen. If the ANC drops below 50%, depending on how badly it drops below 50%, it may be forced to go cap in hand to a party like the EFF, which would dramatically change, some of the policies it has put in place, because the EFF is probably going to have to basically be given, some, incentives to basically join. I would think they would include things like, land reform, might include things that are, more in terms of, some of the socioeconomic things that the EFF, goes for, such as anti-banks, etc. It could also be some kind of political deal in the future where Julius Malema, the leader of the EFF, is guaranteed, some kind of political post with the aim to be president in a few years' time, or next cycle, the cycle thereafter, who knows. But that's the kind of changes we could be looking at in South Africa. And also in the world, I think in the UK, it's pretty much a given that the Tories are not going to win the next election. They are in serious trouble. In fact, it's almost guaranteed that the Labour Party is going to win, and not just win, but probably have one of the greatest victories, if not their greatest victory in history. It would be wiping the board clean of the Tories, I would think, at least for the next cycle. In India, the other major thing out there, of course, Narendra Modi and the BJP is probably going to win. It's been India has not been a huge player in terms of the global economy for a long time. And to give you an idea how bad it's been there, when India left, basically the UK, it got independence. It was like its ranking in terms of per capita GDP, in terms of where it was in the world. Okay, it's remained pretty much the same from that time to now. In fact, the only change has been it's dropped dramatically, and it's only started to recover up the charts in terms of levels of per capita GDP now, in terms of ranking in the world. Obviously, in absolute terms, it's ahead, but in terms of where it is in ranking, what country it is, it's only come back to where it was when it was in independence. We're talking 60, 70 years ago. More than 70, it was 25 years ago. So we're talking a huge, period of time where nothing has happened. But in the last 10 years, India is probably the fastest, if not one of the fastest growing large economies in the world. It's just over the last couple of years taken over, going faster than China. And to give you an idea what that kind of difference means, India and China pretty much had the same, size economy, say 30, 35 years ago. China, by going a couple percentage more points a year for 35 years, is now many multiple times bigger than India. If India is able to grow a few percentage points faster than the Chinese over the next, say, few years, by 2047, 2050, you could be seeing India ranking among the world's, developed countries. We're talking 25 to 30 year period. You take a billion people, or in this case 1.5, 1.4 billion people, and make them, even a level of $10,000 or $15,000 per person, which is not a huge amount of money, compared to the US and such. It would still be a fraction of what the US economy is per person. But because the population is so huge, it's going to be a big player. So India is probably going to continue with the Modi, government going forward. I do think that it might offer more stability. We should see more reforms coming through there. And it might be the next China. So if you're looking where China was in 1990, this might be where India is right now. Okay. Other than that, let's look at what's happening in terms of the economies. This is going to be a year of interest rate cuts. Almost certainly by the middle of the year, we're going to have the first cut come through, possibly by the first quarter of the year. I think the first quarter is optimistic. We've seen some economic releases coming through that indicate the US economy especially is quite strong and might not justify a cut in the first quarter. We South Africa won't cut in all likelihood unless the US cuts first. It would be quite bad for our currency, especially if we see the rand, obviously the South African Reserve Bank cutting interest rates when the US hasn't. It would make the rand weaker, which would cause inflation, which would reverse some of the benefits of that cut anyway. So we would probably only cut out the US cuts, and that's probably going to happen, like I said, by the first half of the year, but maybe not by the first quarter. Lower interest rates are probably going to be good for markets, probably going to be good for a lot of things out there. That might be something that's positive for investors going forward. The next thing we're probably going to see that's going to be important is something people may not know about, but last year, remember, we had this regional banking crisis in the US, and what happened was the US government stepped in and created a fund. This fund expires on the 11th of March this year. It'd be an interesting thing to see whether or not these regional banks have recovered enough that they don't need this funding anymore, but I suspect that they haven't, and there needs to be some kind of replacement coming through. And these replacement measures will mostly have impacts on finances out there. The other thing I want to look at is in South Africa is electricity remains a huge issue, and I think it's going to be an issue at least for the rest of this year and probably for the rest of next year as well. We are seeing South Africans go off grid. We are seeing South Africans basically find ways around the issues in the country. But we also likely to see more issues, not just electricity, because that's obviously something that people can do with solar or whatever. But we are continuing to see issues with Transnet. I think there's a major problem for South Africa's miners, especially because it means that they aren't able to get their goods to the harbour and from the harbour to export countries. Also, I think it affects retailers, because what it means is that the delays at the harbour means that more capital is tied up for a bit longer than they normally is. It's not basically having stuff in 3 months. If you wait for 6 months, if you can basically get your stuff in the shops in the extra 3 months, that money is not being used for anything, and therefore it's tied up and causing problems. And the other thing coming through, which I think might be more of a thing that affects people in the future, is the national health insurance. This is a plan by the ANC government to basically have a public healthcare service, to something like the NHS in the US, the UK, sorry, a government healthcare service. Unfortunately, in South Africa, the problem is that we have a small minority that pays most of the bills and basically expects to get first world, healthcare, and a large majority that doesn't pay the bills but also gets very, very subpar healthcare. A logical person would say, spread the money more evenly and get, everybody up on average. But, that's going to be quite difficult to do. Our system is not designed for that. The funding is not there. The capacity is not there to give everybody a very good, level of care. And so I think that's going to be another issue. And finally, one, out there kind of thing that might be a problem, but I've heard rumors about this coming through, is water. Now, as you have load shedding, we might have water shedding or water shifting, however we're going to call it. And that, I think, is a huge issue, because you can make electricity in your house. It's very difficult to make water in your house. You don't have a borehole. You basically have no issue. You have no problem. No opportunity to do anything. You are basically stuck. Okay, so that's the general themes I think are going to be for this year in the general economy. And then in the AI space, there's a couple of things I want to highlight. Firstly, we're going to see some big new models coming through this year. We already started to see, we had Gemini come in last year, but we're probably going to get GPT-5 this year. We are just going to see huge investments coming through. Microsoft is talking about investing $50 billion in AI infrastructure This is the largest, annual investment by any entity in human history, bigger than governments investing in like infrastructure projects. This is the biggest infrastructure project investment in human history, and it's made now by Microsoft. Nvidia's new chips are going to come out this year as well, and they are likely to revolutionize the market because they're going to make things either 10 times more powerful or 10 times cheaper. And I'm suspecting it's going to be 10 times more powerful because we are not going to see a drop off in spending just yet. We are, in fact, probably going to see a many multiples increase in spending on AI this year. But what I do think we might be seeing this year also is a kind of a pullback, especially when the Magnificent Seven, these companies that have done really well on AI. We're talking Tesla, Microsoft, Alphabet, Meta, etc. These companies have driven, the stock market in the US over the last year or so. And I think that this might be the year in which we see a bit of a pullback in terms of, that particular segment of the market relative to the overall market. Because remember, firstly, the Magnificent Seven has done very well last year, and so maybe that's overdone. And secondly, remember, interest rates are going to be falling. And so many of the companies that are, not making as much in revenue are going to be rising quite dramatically because if you don't have as much interest to pay, revenue right now is not as valuable as revenue in the future, relatively. So if you're having a situation in which interest rates are falling, growth companies are going to do better. The Magnificent Seven is dominated by companies that are earning a lot of money right now. Okay, and I think that is the trends that we're going to see this year. Other things that might be interesting to look at is AR, augmented reality. We're going to see Meta, you're going to see Google, we're going to see Apple, all pushing stuff out in regards to augmented reality this year. It's never worked in the past in terms of wide adoption by the world, but apparently the Meta glasses are incredible. They've basically adopted Meta's AI system, Llama, into it. That apparently makes things incredibly useful. You can kind of like tap your glasses here and ask questions about what you're looking at the moment, which is, a superpower almost, the stuff that you see in science fiction. But yeah, that is the kind of stuff that we might be seeing this year or maybe later, but those are the trends in tech for 2024. I look forward to speaking to you guys again next week where we're going more in depth into the normal, weekly developments. But till then, have a good weekend. Cheers.